integrates her background in psychotherapy and executive training with her deep understanding and application of universal laws to help clients break through the barriers that keep them from living their fullest potential. She is currently impacting lives in her new role at Pursuits Coaching in Boulder, Colorado. Lighthouse Conversations welcomes Alison Repp. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. So Alison and I met, has it been a couple years yet? Probably about two years ago.
Yep, because when I joined Project Cure, you were the first person that I met on the elevator going up.
I sensed that I needed to know this woman. Like, this happened really quickly. It was, she's got this beautiful energy about her. She's naturally lovely and kind. But one of my favorite things is she was one of the first people to immediately show their spirituality to me. I was still a bit...
That.
What was that?
I didn't know that.
It's true, because a lot of times, and this includes me, I had moments where I would shut the door because I didn't want anyone to think I was weird. Mm-hmm. Alison is just who she is all the time. I want to hear a little bit about your journey to getting to that point spiritually.
Well, it's funny you say that, because looking back to when we had that conversation, which was about a year and a half ago, I didn't think that I was that open. I mean, I was less open than I am now. But, my journey to this point, and I think that I'm always going to be on the journey and always expanding. But, growing up, the cat.
We have a little cat visitor.
At least she's not making noise.
She's just blessing us with her presence.
Exactly. So, when I was growing up, I was younger, my main thing was that I just really cared what people thought about me. And I was always trying to do things to please other people. I was always, I would leave conversations or interactions with people, and I would think about how I acted in that scenario and what I would have changed and what they must have thought of me, and, are they mad at me? Are they this? Are they that? Are they judging in some way or another? And, then I went to school to become a psychotherapist, and there was a lot of growth that happened in that, but it was very specifically put on me, the kind of growth, if that makes sense.
We've got a cat on the computer. She's a curious cat.
We'll get back into that. Okay. Now I've got the cat off the computer. She's going back.
She's going back for more. You can just chill there.
Chill.
Yeah. Don't press any buttons.
Okay. So, in grad school, started going through a lot of growth in understanding my internal processes, but it was very specific based on theories that other people have had historically and based on what even the professor thought that you should do. And it wasn't until then I got out of grad school that I came back to my spiritual path, and I did a lot of work on understanding what makes me feel good, and what, the times that I look back in my life and I felt really energized when having interactions with people and just on my own, and what were the elements of that? Who was I being when that felt so good? And I came to realize that my biggest core value is authenticity, and a huge part of that, it's a big definition, but a huge part of that is silliness and just saying whatever I want to say. I say really inappropriate things in appropriate settings, but that's just who I am, and that's who it feels good to be, this open and honest person. And so when I started realizing that, I just start paying more attention, and I come more and more into that throughout my life.
And as you do that, as you feel free to do that, everybody around you feels feels permission to do the same. I know I feel the same way too. The second you started being open with me, I was able to be open with you, and not just energetically and being, silly and being positive, because I'm silly all the time, and I love when I have people to do that with. But I felt like I could just tell you anything, and you were telling me about Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I was talking about my sleep paralysis experiences and lucid dreaming, and you didn't bat an eyelash. So I just felt very free and open. So the way you present yourself in the world is a really high vibrational way of being. And part of what happens when you're an awakened person, I believe, when I see it in people, is because they do have that sense of authenticity, and they do show up in a way that allows others to feel free to do so as well.
Yeah, and what I've realized is that that's when I get the best connections with people, and it's less about making other people feel comfortable. That's an amazing side effect, but it's more about how I feel when I'm being that, and then my vibration is higher, and other people end up feeling that way, and so it started to become very apparent to me when that wasn't happening and when I wasn't being my authentic self. And so I've started just intentionally just doing weird things. Like, when I see somebody, especially somebody who makes me uncomfortable, I'll just get really into that like silliness and that weirdness. And then I know that I'm staying in alignment with myself. And then they feel, like you said, comfortable and close. That's just a nice side effect.
I like it. So many of the things we talk about with our guests on this show is the journey of awakening. Now, I don't know if it was ever in your mind like, wow, I am now an awakened person. Do you have your own definition of it, and do you know how it happened for you?
I don't think that it was like one instance that I woke up one day and said, I'm awake, emotionally and spiritually. It's just been a process over time, and it's just kind of, you get to points where you're feeling good, and then you take a look back and say, oh wow, I'm showing up really differently now, and this feels really good, and it's really cool. And so I don't think that there's like asleep and then awake. I think that we're all in our own ways waking up little by little throughout our lives, and it might not be in the same way that you and I are. I don't think anybody does it in the same way. But I do look back at even 5-10 years ago, and I am a completely different person. And I wouldn't change any of the experiences I've had to get to this place, good or bad. And I'm still doing it. And I know that in 10 years I'll look back on who I am now and say, oh my gosh, I've come so far since then.
And the awareness of that is always great, because you are able to see the changes that have happened. I'm thinking about like maybe books you read 5-10 years ago compared to what you're reading now. Like, who do you love? Who is surprising to you even that you love, that you never thought you'd get into that kind of work?
So it's interesting. I had a friend who gave me a stack of Abraham Hicks CDs 10 to 12 years ago. And that was my first introduction into this more like spiritual realm. And to me, the moment I started listening to them, it felt like home. And it still does. I still go back to Abraham Hicks a lot. And whenever I do, it just feels comforting, like I'm drinking hot cocoa by a fire. Like I just feel like I'm at home. But I've never been a big reader. And the only thing now that I feel like inspires me and motivates me is listening to books, but only self-development books, and only ones that resonate with me. And so it wasn't that I've shifted my reading over, or audiobooks over the last 10 years. It's just that I've started doing it to be,
that makes sense.
Getting into books at all.
I'm totally with you on that self-development book journey. I love reading them. I'm audibling when I'm driving. Yeah. I'm reading when I'm home. And I think I may still have one of your Abraham Hicks CDs that I've probably forgotten to get you, but I will not forget.
No, you have to pay it forward.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. And I love it. There's so many different ways to get this information, video, audio, this conversation, reading a book. Do you have suggestions for people that, like, please pick up, of course, the Abraham Hicks, but other than that you might let the listeners at home in on some fun secrets?
I can just tell you about my favorites. And, for everybody in their own path, you're only going to be open to hearing what you're ready for. And so I would encourage anybody who looks these books up to look at them and just kind of tune into your intuition, see if it
resonates.
If it vibes with you.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, love Joe Dispenza. I'm listening to a book now that I'm loving called Letting Go, and it's by David R. Hawkins. I love Deepak Chopra. This isn't books, but the meditations with Deepak and Oprah are, I was not expecting them to be so transformative because they're just so easy. And then it was one of those experiences where I looked back at 3 weeks before I'd started it and was like, oh my gosh, that was life-changing. Who else do I love? You might have to cut this part out.
No, we're going to leave it in. And and if more comes, you can tell us as it comes to you. But I wanted to ask you, so...
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
No,
it's not all books. So I also listen to a lot of podcasts, like Just Lively.
Yes.
If you're a businesswoman and an entrepreneur, Denise Duffield Thomas, who does the Lucky Bitch podcast, and she has a great book too, Get Rich Lucky Bitch, and also just Lucky Bitch. And I also love Aaron Doty. I've
been watching him too.
Yeah,
he's on YouTube.
Saw him through Just Lively.
Nice.
So he's on YouTube. He now has a podcast. He does amazing things on Instagram, and also his current girlfriend, Lior Alexandra, has a great YouTube channel as well that's much more feminine.
Nice.
And so both of them have been really influential as well.
Well, lots of good advice there. I want to talk about your career. So you trained as a therapist, and you worked in that for how many years?
I worked in that for 3 years in private practice.
So I want to talk about what was it like to hold space for people when you're seeing them going through your journey? Did you have to learn how to not take on their energy when they were going through suffering so that you could be the best therapist that you could be?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in grad school they teach you empathy, empathy, empathy. Bring yourself to the space that they're in. And I had to learn through trial and error that did not serve me or my clients at all, because if I come into a session here and my client comes in here, I'm feeling good or even neutral, and they come in feeling grief or fear or whatever it is, it doesn't help either of us for me to drop down here. And Abraham Hicks actually has a great saying, why dig yourself a hole that you then have to build a ladder to climb out of? And so I started, rather than having empathy, having compassion, where I gave space for them and let them be and accepted them where they were, and then helped them find their unique path to move forward and to move up the vibrational scale.
Yes. And we'll touch on that in just a moment. But I love that instead of you coming down to their level to help them, because you can't. What is that quote? You can't solve the problem from the same level it was created on. Is that Einstein or some? Just
I don't know, but it's the same kind of. Yeah, there's so many. I'm sure there's so many quotes that speak to the same thing.
I'm gonna find it, and I'm gonna make sure our audience knows where to find it too. So you raise them up to your level so they can see things from a different perspective, if at all possible. And I think that's fantastic. Are you an empath?
No.
I think that's amazing, because I couldn't do the work that you did to get deep into that kind of work. When you're an empath, like, I feel everything. I don't just see it and have empathy and be like, oh my gosh, yes, I feel for you. I literally feel for you, and so I had to learn all of these tools to keep my energy in my own space and not absorb all of that.
Yeah, and there's huge benefits to being an empath. And I used to think, especially with grad school and just the society, the norms that I was raised in, that it's good to feel, when somebody's crying, that you cry too. And I used to really try to make myself do that. And I thought there was something wrong with me that I wouldn't cry with people. It was like when people would cry, I would do the opposite, and I would become really strong just naturally. And I almost never in my life have cried with somebody.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a defense mechanism or anything. It was just how I naturally have always been. And just recently, through my work with clients and through all of my self-development, I started to realize it's not a bad thing that I'm not an empath. No. I'm able to hold strong on a higher emotional level and then help raise people up to that.
Absolutely. Everybody has such unique gifts and talents, and that's why we're all better or worse at certain professions or certain things that we choose to do in life.
Yeah.
And, it can be a crippling thing to be an empath in terms of I can't function because I'm just carrying too much stuff, but it's also can be one of your greatest gifts as well. It's a matter of learning how to use it. Yeah. And so you are a natural space holder. You're able to show up and boom, your presence is very comforting to someone instead of taking on what they're taking on. So it's extremely valuable, and how not everybody knows how to do that naturally. So those are some of your gifts that you brought to the table.
It definitely can be learned, I think.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just a natural thing. So I think it was beneficial for the work that I went into.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about this vibrational scale, like the spiral. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So our emotions create our vibration, and we all literally have an electromagnetic field outside of our bodies, and they've been able to measure it to up to 10 feet outside of our body, but there's speculation and theories that it goes way beyond that. And there actually have been studies that our emotions can, you can send love to somebody across the world, and it helps in the healing process. And so we have thoughts that create a release of chemicals that land in our bodies, and we then feel an emotion, and our emotions are a physical sensation in our bodies that then create this electromagnetic field. And the emotions that are what we would consider negative, I like to call them unwanted or less comfortable emotions, such as grief, fear, sadness, anger. Those create a chaotic vibration, chaotic waves outside of our bodies. I like to give the example of if you've ever walked into a room where two people were fighting.
You can feel that.
And they're not actively fighting. You walk in and you're like, whoa, that's proof that we feel that energy. And then when you can move up the scale into even neutrality, contentment, ease, freedom, joy, excitement, peace, all of those. Those have a more coherent wave.
And what I've also heard is that, you start down here, you're not necessarily going to be able to jump from here to, from pure depression to pure joy. So you can go a little bit up the scale a little bit at a time. So even anger is preferable to depression because it has a higher vibration. There's more energy. Yes.
Yeah, you're moving.
Exactly. And so I think that's helpful when doing self-development work, because you don't have unrealistic expectations of yourself that I just need to be happy all the time, no matter what. And it can be an incremental change.
Yeah, and it almost needs to be, because even if you are able to go from depression to peace and joy and love and gratitude, it's fleeting if you just try to jump from one to the other.
Right.
And so you have to give yourself that space to feel whatever emotion you're feeling. And we tend to think that if we go into that space that we're never going to be able to get out of it. And actually, you experience it for a very short period of time if you just go into it. And I like to do this thing where, if I'm having anxiety, I'll stop and I'll say, okay, just feel anxiety as intensely as I can right now. And it just dissipates. And some people say that the most you experience it is 10 to 20 minutes. With all my clients and with myself, I've never seen it last longer than a minute or two.
Wow.
When you really go into that. And then you're able to feel a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better, and as you just allow yourself to feel those emotions.
Yes, and I know that the best way to get through something, what is it through? It's not. Let me rephrase that. The best way to get it's not to get through it, is through it. Well,
to get past it is to go through it.
The only way out is through.
Yes.
There she is. Had a little momentary lapse here. But yes, if you try to avoid it or like, this is uncomfortable, I don't want to feel it, I don't want to feel it, push it away, it's just going to keep coming back.
And stronger.
Because
you build it and build it and build it.
The energy builds around it, and so it's harder to ignore. So yeah, it's uncomfortable, but if we can sit with our suffering and just have it, give it all to me, then we can pass through it, and also take the lesson, like what's it trying to tell me? Because I think any kind of pain is information that something's not right.
Yeah, or information about what you don't want, so that you can identify what you do want.
Would we call that contrast?
We would call that contrast.
Thank you.
Us Abraham Hicks. Whatever. Jess Lively calls them Abrahamsters.
Abrahamsters, that's right. I love that. She's so great.
But it's true. I mean, there's opportunity in every unwanted experience that we have to understand more of what we do want.
Absolutely. So now I want to hear more about what you do want. So as your career has evolved, you've been finding other opportunities that are resonating with you. What is exciting to you right now?
So after I had my second baby, I had gone on maternity leave, and I just realized that I am wanting to do, and I'm meant to do, something bigger than one-on-one. You know, I can only help maximum of 20 people at a time if I'm doing one-on-one therapy. And also, being a therapist doesn't resonate with me anymore. There's just this stigma around it that therapists just have you focus on your past, and I just don't have that approach. I've always had a forward-looking approach, a more spiritual approach. Clients really want to go into, why do I feel this way? I have to pinpoint, the core of this issue and when it started in order to get past it. And I would never allow us to go there, because it actually doesn't solve anything. And so I just want to get away from that, because it just doesn't resonate with me anymore. And I want to work with women on a larger scale. And so I've actually partnered with a woman in Boulder, and we are working with female CEOs, not just CEOs. We are starting a group for CEOs, but leaders. We want to work with women who are impacting others' lives, and we want our work with them to trickle down through the rest of the people that they are influencing. And so we work with women on professional and personal barriers that are keeping them from reaching their highest potential.
That sounds like something I would like to do. I'm a founder and / spiritual spark plug. Maybe I can be a part of that too. I made it up. It's on my biz card.
I love it.
I chose it because I figured that I want to ignite that journey in people, that seeking, that like, oh, I know there's something. What is it? Boom, here we go. Side note.
Yes,
but
love it.
So I want to know about how you do this. Is it programs? Is it retreats? What does the picture look like?
Yeah, so right now we're starting a group to bring about 12 female CEOs together, and that's our starting point. We're taking these small steps. We're very aligned in just letting things flow, and instead of swimming upstream, as Abraham Hicks would say. And so this is our first inspired idea, and so we're taking the action on it to create this group of women. And then the goal is to go into companies and work with leadership teams one-on-one, and then provide workshops for the rest of the company, so that everybody can be approaching their work and their personal lives in the same kind of way, because the way that we do it is very counterintuitive, but it works in the long run and helps people live a really fulfilling and meaningful life.
And that's something we all could use.
Yeah.
I really love how you bring your spirituality into your kids' lives. You have different rituals with your daughter. Is there anything you want to share about how important it is to you to have that those moments with her like that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because she's 4, and so she's not fully comprehending things, but that's kind of a cool lesson for me, because you have to approach it on more of an energetic level than understanding through words. But there's so many different ways that goes, that I could go with that conversation. But I just never discount anything that she talks about that people would typically, we're trained as children to move away from our intuition and from our connection to source energy. And so we're trained to do that through judgment from others, like, oh, that's not real, that was just a dream, that was just this or that. And so I work really hard not to discount anything that she says. She's told me about how she was with a man named John, and she fell into a pool and everything went black, and she decided to come back here to be with us, to be with our family. And and so I never discount those things. I'm like, oh, tell me more. The other day she told me that there was a woman in our home, and so I was like, oh, where is she now? Are you able to talk to her? What is she saying? And so I want her to stay as connected as possible, and we do things like setting intentions for segments of our day, and how do you want to feel, and what kind of person do you want to be. And I'm making myself sound like a really incredible parent, and I'm not. I mean, this is like at my best. I'm not saying that it's easy. It's definitely a struggle because our kids tend to trigger us, and so sometimes I get angry and I get upset, and I think the important thing is owning that part of our humanity and growing from it. It's the contrast.
It is the contrast, and I don't think anyone can say they've never gotten angry at their kids.
Yeah.
Except
if they
for me,
do, then they're lying.
Not true. But what you're doing is a huge service for her, because so many kids lose that magic early, or this, like you said, the intuition, the feeling, the visions they might have. They're so connected, and they're not held back by society's preconceptions of like, that's weird, that's not normal.
Yeah.
And so it's so important that her voice is able to be not silenced by you in that regard. So I think that's an incredible thing, and something so many of us could use moving forward, because there's only positive things that can come from that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also great because we have the baby, and they have such a connection, and Grayson knew that before I even got pregnant that she was going to have a little sister, and started talking about her sister Elliot. And even now she'll tell me about when Elliot was my older sister, or when I was married to Daddy. I actually saw that in a past life regression that I did, that I was actually their child, and we lived in California. She talks about California a lot as well, and
it's amazing.
And so it's so cool to me, and I'm so grateful that I've come to this level of awakening, we'll say, at this point, because I would hate to have gotten to this point later in life and look back and said, oh my gosh, I discounted this and this and this, and now I totally believe it and I agree with it, and I would have loved to approach it differently. So I'm really grateful for that.
It's a beautiful thing. Yeah. As we start to wrap this up a little bit, I want to ask you, so Grayson's had some amazing experiences that you were able to witness just by what she said to you.
Yeah.
Is there something that's been, something metaphysical, something supernatural, something that has showed up in your life that you just cannot explain, and it has been an experience that, only what you want to share, of course, that might be interesting for our viewers at home to hear about?
The thing that comes to mind is, it was actually just a few months ago. I'll give a little background on it. It has a lot to do with Joe Dispenza and his work. He, just for anybody who doesn't know, he is very spiritual and woo-woo, but he backs up everything with science, which is so cool that we're living in a time that we can do that, because these are things that people have been talking about for thousands of years, and now we're at a point in history where we're proving these things. But he talks a lot about healing yourself, and I've done this in a lot of instances, but in February I really hurt my foot, and to the point where I could barely walk in flats. I definitely could not walk in heels. I was starting to think about maybe I'll have to have surgery, and I was really recognizing that I was focusing on the problem. And so I decided I'm going to start meditating on this. And so one day I was sitting and meditating, and suddenly I just felt this energy come in through my head, and I felt these warm tingles just fall through my body, and I was just seeing this bright light coming into me, and then I felt it go down to my foot, and I just felt this warmth and just this comfort in my foot where it was hurt, and I just sat there and in gratitude for this experience. And I got up from that meditation, and my foot hasn't hurt at all since. It's just completely healed.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Was that from becoming supernatural? Was that meditation from that?
I believe I was doing one from that. Although, I was doing a guided meditation, and I kind of tuned out of that because this experience just started happening. And I realized that I've had those experiences a few times, and they only happen when I'm not trying to make it happen.
That right there it's a rule for life. Things do not happen well when you really try to make them happen. Yeah. It's about flow.
Because when you're really trying, the energy you have is that it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. So you're not allowing. Good
message for me today and what I've been going through today. Yeah. Just got to let it flow, y'all. And truly, that's when the magic happens. Mm-hmm. When you allow space for it, when you disconnect from the attachment to, it must be this way. It's got to look like this.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to. And when it's too controlling, you don't allow space for grace. You don't allow space for divine timing to show up. If you're like, I'm going to actually manipulate what's happening in the situation by changing this factor or calling this person or writing that email, instead of just saying, okay, I trust you. It's worked out before.
Yeah, and you're cutting yourself off to infinite other possibilities.
That's right. That's right. That's why it's hard for me to make goals. Like, there's certain goals I can make, but by that same token, if I say, in 5 years I want this, in 10 years I want this, then if I focus and put all my energy towards those things, does that cut out what I really would love even more without even knowing it? It doesn't leave space for that universal intelligence to make its way in.
Yeah, because you're identifying the how and the when. And
yes.
And when you are focused on the how and the when, that's when you're closing yourself off to all these other possibilities. And actually, there have been studies done that when you set goals, it actually activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is stress. And you are then blocking off your energy field. And so what I always encourage people to do is to have visions or dreams and get into a place where you just think about ideally, not realistically, but ideally, what would you love for your life, and to have an intention to achieve that. I don't even say achieve that, to flow into that. But it's really important to drop the importance of it. So you have the intention, and then you let go of the desire. Desire also activates the sympathetic nervous system and the stress, which is so counterintuitive to what we're taught. We're taught that you have to really, really want it, and you have to really, really work hard to get it if you're gonna get there. And that's true. If you really, really want something, you definitely have to work really, really hard to get there. And you don't enjoy the journey. And so when you can have an intention for something and then drop the importance of it and bring yourself into the now, then that's when you just flow into it, and you end up getting there, and you might not even realize you're there for a while, and suddenly it hits you one day. You're like, oh,
I'm there.
Here I am. This happened, and I didn't work hard at all at it.
Because you weren't thirsty for it, like Jess Lively likes to say, which I love that term.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to daydream all the time. My parents would drive, we'd go on a car, a trip across the country, or I would even just sit in my room and I'd put my headphones on, and my imagination would just run wild. And it's amazing, like, how many of those things actually came true. I realized a few years ago I stopped dreaming. I stopped make-believing and thinking like, yes, me on the stage with that Oscar, or things like that, where I'm like, you know what, you never know, it still could happen. And the whole point is, it's fun to say, like, it raises your vibration even just to think about it when you're when you're idealizing something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do forget to dream, and we think that we're dreaming a lot of times, and I see this even with myself. I mean, I've been called out on it as well, but I definitely see it with people that I work with, that we think we're dreaming, but we stay within the realm of it being realistic.
Yeah.
And we think, I don't know what could even happen in my life where I could own 7 jets and a yacht in the Mediterranean. Like, that's not going to happen with me because I don't have this kind of company or whatever it is. And we really limit ourselves in that way. And honestly, when you get into a place of dreaming, it doesn't actually end up mattering what the thing is. The only reason we ever want anything is for the feeling that it gives us. And so that's the purpose of dreaming, is we get that feeling that we think we would get when we achieve whatever now. Yeah. And that's really the only reason that we want it, is so we can have that feeling.
So if we can create that feeling, the vortex, would you say?
Yes.
Going back to the Abraham hamsters.
That's one way of putting it, yes.
Yeah, and you're raising your vibration, and then you can attract more things without even trying.
And then when you get the things, they don't actually matter as much anymore. That's why you see people with loads of money who wear T-shirts with holes in them and dirty hats, and you would never know that they're billionaires.
Right, right. Well, I have really enjoyed talking to you, Alison. I'm so glad that you were here for Lighthouse Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
You got it.
Peace.